Hi everyone, I'm Daniel, and today we're going to spotlight a card and talk all about water protection as you see here on the screen. If you're new to the game, this is a classic spell event in the Mystic class. It was released in the original core set, and it's here again in the Chapter 2 core set. So, what does this card do? It costs you one resource, and you play it when you draw a non-weakness treachery card. So these are essentially encounter cards that aren't the enemies. Treacheries are a type of encounter card. And it has to be a non-weakness one, because technically weaknesses can be treacheries too, but not those either. Okay, what happens? You cancel the card's revelation effect. That's the part that says revelation, and maybe it makes you take a test or just bad stuff happens. Don't do it. Don't do any of those things. But you do take one horror. Now, if there's a surge on the card, that still happens. That's usually earlier than the revelation effect. If there's ever surge as part of the revelation effect, that gets canceled though. So anything that is after that revelation part doesn't happen. Cool. So there are some lookalikes in other classes, but this is really the identity of the mystics to me. Say no to a bad thing happening, but there's a little bit of a cost to it. So it's both a resource, a card in your hand, and the horror. Luckily, those things usually don't matter too much. Well, I think a lot of people like this card, especially when they're first starting out. And I'm going to kind of talk about the journey people often take in evaluating this card. So, first off, they say, wow, what a powerful thing. I'm going to cancel everything with water protection because you're looking at whatever might happen and it seems kind of bad. Well, just throw out your water protection and you're good to go. Problem with this is that as you get a little bit better at the game, you start thinking about, well, maybe I could have let that go. And war protection maybe doesn't feel as powerful anymore when you are, less worried about those sorts of consequences. But there is sometimes a really bad encounter card, and often people start just saving their war protection for a card that's called Ancient Evils. This is a card on Revelation, says place one doom on the current agenda. This can cause the current agenda to advance. Really, really bad. It keeps you from basically making pace with the game. Though, after some time, you might say, is that really that big of a deal either? And you get to the point where you evaluate this card kind of in this U-shaped curve that you say, I'm not really scared of anything at all. And you stop including war protection in your deck altogether. Ancient Evils, no big deal. I can just end the scenario faster, especially when you have a different card that's probably going to progress the game in your deck instead. However, I do think that those of you who have reached this stage in your Arkham career should maybe step back and reevaluate, especially with the smaller card pool, that maybe you should be scared of some things. So I'd like in this video to start getting people back up to here, which is essentially where you should be with this card. Don't use it on everything. Maybe use it on Ancient Evils, but maybe there's some other cards in the encounter deck that just are going to ruin your day even more. Now, this is highly specific to the scenario, the campaign. You will have to know something about what's in that deck in the first place. And of course, it matters who you are playing, what your team is like. What are the kinds of things that are going to mess you up? And that's what I think the card is really good for, is that you don't just slamming it down as soon as you see a particular card or the first time you see anything that seems maybe bad, but rather you're going to be using it in the situations that you want to use it in. If you never use it, well, great. You probably didn't need a different card in place of it either. You were just winning the scenario anyway. So let me just talk about a few other things that I think are helpful to think through what this card does and doesn't do. So thinking about they're all here at once. Thinking about the newer players, that you have to be able to evaluate the consequences of treachery failure. So one thing people often point out with war protection is it costs you a card, a resource, and a horror. If the treachery that you drew is going to cause you to do any number of those things anyway, well, if you're willing to take the horror, willing to lose a resource, willing to lose a card, maybe you just take the test anyway, and maybe you won't lose all of those things. We'll see some examples of treacheries in a little bit. I'll talk about whether or not they're worth canceling with ward, but that's kind of the math you need to think about. Is this actually hurting me just as much as the card would be itself in the test? The next part is for potency of testless treacheries. This is your ancient evils, or as we'll see, cosmic evils. Some things just happen. You don't get a save throw. You don't get to take a test to try to not have that bad thing happen anyway. So evaluating those is also important, and also knowing, hey, that if they just happen, this is maybe something you can still play around, and you don't need the ward either. But both of these things together require you to know something more and have some more experience in the game. The third one I think is also interesting in chapter 2. There are still synergies with spells and with taking horror, which makes ward actually a little bit better than it just reads. If you're able to draw this off of your arcane initiate, which only draws spell cards, assets or events or skills for that matter, and if you can make some use of that horror, for example, you place the horror on your Cloak of Resonance, which deals enemies a damage, or you're drawing a card with Jim Culver, then the horror is actually kind of an upside too. Most mystics have an extra pool of horror. They have more soak or more sanity than they do health. So the horror isn't such a bad thing either. Now with Izzy, you have to be a bit protective of this because she needs the horror for other reasons, but you do have Alexi. Remember, the take one horror portion of this is not direct, so you can put the horror on other kinds of soak and just erase it with that kind of healing. Also, there's plenty of healing of horror in the card pool too. Lastly, I do think that War Protection lets you play a little differently, especially when you're getting towards the end of a scenario. If you're able to think one round ahead and say, all I need to do to complete this scenario is move here, get a clue, then resign, maybe a War Protection gives you a bit of peace of mind that whatever I draw won't cause me to lose. I can't advance the agenda too early and end the game with Cosmic Evils. I'm not going to draw something that's going to just flat out kill me, like deal me 3 damage. And yes, this does not cancel enemies, but potentially the enemies aren't going to be a problem either. If you are able to take one horror, probably you could take 1 or 2 attacks. Some of those treacheries are going to be a bigger problem for you than just drawing an enemy last round. Especially the case in solo, when this is the only encounter card that you will draw. There's no worrying about what your other friends are going to draw and mess up the whole board state. So I like having that war protection towards the end, maybe even 2 of them, to say, I think the next few rounds are entirely predictable. And that's much more powerful than I think people realize. So let's go through some of the chapter 2 treacheries and just talk briefly about what the differences are in taking the test, letting it go, or playing the war of protection. I will preface this by saying that my chapter 1 treachery experience is that there's often more heavy hitters in the encounter deck, a treachery that really just changes things considerably. And a lot of the chapter 2 encounter cards have been smaller little punches, not really something that's going to change the board state a lot. Maybe it only deals you 1 or 2 damage, and you could probably let most of those go. So that's just sort of what I've noticed so far. There's less crypt chill effects where you just discard an asset and it's a really tough test, and more little things, which can add up. All right, so let's take a look at the first few. Again, all of these are from the core set, and that means all except for maybe 1 or 2 are things that will reappear in future campaigns. First one, Crossfire. This is a hazard. Again, these are all treacheries, so they're all something that you could play ward on. Revelation. So this is the part that you would cancel. Test 3 agility. That's an average test. If you fail, each investigator at your location takes 1 damage. I don't think I'm ever going to ward this unless there's the possibility that someone dies. And that seems very, very unlikely. While it's annoying, it's probably something that I'm not worth giving up a card, a resource, and the other type of damage, horror, for. So yeah, worst things that could happen is you just take a damage, and then someone else might take a damage too if they're there. The agility test might be hard, right? But probably not that big of a deal. Remember, whenever there's a test, it's possible for most of these mystics, anyways, that they just pass anyway. Pulling a token from the bag and passing versus playing War Protection, right? That's the math you have to balance. What are the chances I pass the test anyway, and I don't have to spend the card, the resource, take the horror? That's kind of important to not just throw away the ward on these puny little cards that don't do much. I should also say that on hard difficulty, and non-standard, some of the token effects that you might draw from just taking tests like this could be really bad, in which case playing the ward to avoid, I don't know, a -5 that also makes you discard two things, right? That is really bad. So on hard, especially, but even just on standard, sometimes this happens too if you fail. It's worse than just the printed effect on the card here. So the scenario reference card will tell you other bad things that could happen. Got to weigh that in your mind too. But I find that most newer players are less cautious about this sort of thing and are more likely to say, the worst thing that could possibly happen is what I need to hedge against every single time. But remember, you only have one or two copies of Ward in your deck, so you can't do that all the time. It's just not possible. You have to choose your spots. Okay, Eager for Death. This is a willpower test. Increase the skill difficulty by 1 for each damage on you, which could be a lot, but if you fail, you're taking 2 horror. I bet you that if you're willing to take 1 horror, most of the time you're willing to take 2. Additionally, mystics, who have access to ward anyway, are likely to have additional bonuses to their willpower, so they're more likely to just pass this test outright. Don't ward this one unless you really can't take the 2 horror. Cosmic Evils. This is the really tough one. I think in Chapter 1, Ancient Evils was kind of like this. In certain terms of the place one doom on the current agenda, right? You ward this because that's really bad. You don't need to do it all the time. There might be worse things, but I think in the Chapter 2 environment where our decks are not quite as powerful, it's a good place for it. If you want to let this go, the Doom might not matter if you know the scenario. Taking a direct damage and direct horror and then drawing another encounter card is just flat out worse. Again, you just take the horror from war protection, doesn't have to be direct. Putrid Vapors. This is an agility test, so it could be difficult. If you fail, take 1 horror and discard a non-story asset you control. It's also kind of like the same story of, well, Ward is also giving me the horror, so how bad is it to discard the non-story asset? So most of the time, if you're just getting set up in the scenario and it's your ally, it's your weapon, this is extremely bad. But if you have some maybe empty assets or almost empty assets, then this isn't so bad, right? If you have one offering left on your offering bowl, then let that go. It was pretty cheap to play in the first place. You're taking the horror anyway. Just fail a test. It's okay. Arcane Lock. This is an interesting one. As initial cost to enter or leave the attached location, you spend an action. So you're basically saying, I have to spend an extra action to move away or move in, and that can really add up in a higher player count. I would ward this if I don't think I can pass that test on the bottom. Now, if you're a mystic, you're spending an action to do that and probably passing. Might need to put a little bit more into it, but it might not be the world's worst thing to ward if you feel like that's not going to happen, or you're spending, I don't know, a lot of actions with the whole team. So this one's really tricky. I probably wouldn't, but sometimes you get to a crunch position in the scenario where you know you need to do a lot of movement. This got stuck in the middle of the whole map, and that's kind of bad. Ashen Rebirth. This one is not a core set encounter card, but it's from the third scenario of Brethren of Ash. Test 4 willpower. If you fail, you must either take 2 direct damage or 2 direct horror, whichever you have more of. Ward protection is pretty good against this. Yes, it's a willpower test. You might be able to pass anyway, but the consequences of failing are much worse than just taking the 1 horror. Remember, that 1 horror could go on an asset and you'll be fine. 2 direct horror could kill you. But on the other hand, you might actually need to take the 2 direct damage. So very circumstantial, but I would think about warding this to prevent future problems. Languor. Put it into play in your threat area. After your turn begins, discard the top card of your deck. If it's a weakness, draw it. Otherwise, you cannot play or commit cards of that type, asset, event, or skill this round. This is pretty swingy, right? You might need to do this, but this is going to happen every single turn. It's always going to cost you 2 actions to get rid of. You might be okay with this for a little while. It might not matter, but you actually don't know. I would word this if you feel like the actions are too big of a deal. Downpour. Test 3 agility. For each point you fail by, you must either lose an action or place one of your clues on your location. Well, Do you have clues? How many actions does it take to pick them back up? Yikes. This one is a test that you really want to pass. And I think it's important to compare this Languor as well as the Arcane Lock as well. Actions during your turn to spend are worth a lot. You only get so many of those. If you can pass tests during the Mythos phase, like for Downpour, and not lose actions, it's much, much better than just saying, I'm going to lose some actions during my turn. What if there's enemies? What if there's movement you need to do? It can put you way behind versus just canceling the card altogether and not risking it. Much, much tougher than just losing resources, cards in hand, or taking damage or horror. Wild Compulsion, this is exactly what we're talking about. A 3 willpower test. For each point you fail by, you must either discard a card at random from your hand or lose a resource. It's funny because if you play War Protection, you are both losing a card from your hand, not random, and you're losing a resource. So, how likely are you to pass the test? This is a good question. So, basically, playing the ward gives you the horror. It's like failing by 2 if you could choose the card and taking a horror. Now, if you have a bunch of resources, you can just lose the resources. I would attempt this test and hope that I can just lose 1 or 2 resources, and then it feels about on par with just playing the ward anyway, but now you still have the ward. This is not the last one. I'll just have a few more after this. Flash Flood. This is a testless effect, so there's no chance for you to avoid this from happening unless you play the ward. You attach it to your location. Attached location gets +4 Shroud, which is a huge number. Forced when the round ends, discard Flash Flood. So it goes away on its own. You don't need to spend any actions to get rid of this, unlike the Arcane Lock. However, it does force you maybe to just do something else during that turn. And that might not be something that is in the cards for that scenario. You might be saying, we have to get these clues. Sometimes this doesn't matter, though. You should, as a new player, look at this and not be scared of the big number because maybe you can get the clues from other kinds of effects, testless clue effects, for example. I would almost never ward this, even though it's a powerful effect. I can usually figure out a way around this, and it never hurts me unless I have nothing other than just I need to pass a test at +4 difficulty several times to get the clues. That's unlikely. Of course, it could happen, but maybe even in the last couple of rounds, you can say, the only thing I need to do to win is get 2 clues, and you draw Flash Flood, War Protection still in your hand, just play it. Now you don't worry about this at all. Last couple of rounds of the game, you probably should just use the ward unless that's going to hurt you from doing other things. It probably won't, but certainly it could. I've been in the case where I needed to commit the ward protection because I either didn't have any money or I couldn't take the horror. Unlikely for you not to have the money because you usually get the money in upkeep. The one resource will pay for this, but it may not be the best use of that resource. Fire. This is another attached to a location effect. When the investigation phase ends, each non-elite card with health at this location takes 1 direct damage. That is a lot of damage. That is not just 1 damage, it's probably 1 to all of your allies. It also could be to enemies, which isn't so bad if you can leave some enemies there. That this costs another test, another action to get rid of this, which is funny because, again, as you can see for Noxious Smoke right next to it, sometimes the test is upfront, no action to spend. This one, it's on the card, so you need to waste your turn trying to get rid of it, and if you run out of, well, resources to be able to pass the test, it's still there and will do the bad thing. Interesting card. In the campaign, the core set campaign, it is more than just this. There are some other effects that care about fire, so it's a little bit worse than this looks, but I would ward this if it shows up at the wrong time, and it very well could. It's saving you a lot of grief. By comparison, Noxious Smoke is very friendly. Even though it has you might take 3 damage associated with it, it's got a choice of which stat you want to test. Is it your willpower or your agility? Now, you could ward this if you feel like 3 damage is a big problem. Take the horror instead, but probably you're better off just using your better number and try to pass the test. Generally in this game, if you are stacking one of those numbers, and you probably should, to 4, right, or higher, then the chaos bag on standard difficulty is not going to hurt you that much. Unless it does. Unless you draw the auto fail, take 3, and then you die, in which case, maybe play the ward. But I think at the beginning of the scenario, you don't play the ward. You only do it if you run into the situation later on. Okay, I think that's the last one of these. I should also sort of mention the legacy versions. In Path to Carcosa and in Dunwich Legacy, there were upgraded versions that were released, which have become, well, the level 2 one has become kind of a staple for many playgroups. This one is the exact same card as the level 0 we've been talking about, except for now I can cancel someone else's Treachery card. They don't even have to be at your location. Any location, they get to just ignore whatever it is. This becomes much more powerful in a larger player group when you have Ancient Evils, and now it's no longer you that needs to draw that card to cancel it, but anyone draws it, and then you as the Mystic can cancel it from afar. Doesn't work with Cosmic Evils. That card has Peril. War Protection level 2, you cannot play when someone draws a Peril card. The level 5 version you think is just better. It's different. It's not a strict upgrade from the level 2. In fact, it gets rid of the protect other investigators portion. Instead, it is when you draw a non-weakness encounter card. Different from Treachery card because now you can cancel enemies. You draw an enemy, goodbye. Does it have 5 health? It does not matter. Is it elite? Does not matter. This becomes much more of a solo card because now you can do what I said before, which is just say no to anything that pops up. There's nothing that can stop you from finishing off the scenario. Very, very powerful, but quite expensive at 5 XP. All of these are good. Depends on your playstyle. If you like saying no to the game, you will like War Protection. But I would urge most people to get better at evaluating those treacheries. What's actually going to be a problem right now? And what are the kinds of things that I can probably just deal with anyway for a normal turn? I will say that most classes don't have something like this, and they seem to get on just fine anyway. So probably you could get away with not playing Ward, but it's worth keeping for that really, really tough encounter card, that haymaker that does make or break you winning or losing the scenario. Often this is when multiple doom gets placed on either the agenda or on encounter cards, enemies, for example, and it's really hard to get past that if you're going to potentially lose several rounds. It's to keep the game from pulling combos on you. That happens most likely at 3 or 4 player, but it could happen at 2 player too. And it's often something that's really good for the end of the game when you have that kind of ace in your hole. Okay, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I'm sure I will make another video sometime soon about some other classic cards and how to evaluate them, but that's War Protection. I'll see you in the next video.